Conrad Elkins, a mysterious man, appeared on modern streets, seemingly ordinary yet extraordinary. His enigmatic personality, impossible to define, was like a puzzle. I, a chemistry student, was struck by his unusual features, which didn't fit any known ethnic stock. His age was also a mystery, with a smooth face and an expression that hinted at something ancient. Elkin's modish attire and delicate build didn't draw attention, but his remarkable features, like his large, luminous eyes and flexible hands, did. His habitual expression was unreadable, giving the impression of profound wisdom and aesthetic refinement. I was intrigued and decided to learn more about him. We met frequently in libraries and museums, where he studied modern science, archaeology, and sexology. His motives were unclear, but I sensed a fraternal interest in my own studies. Others found him fascinating, but knew little about him, as he was extremely taciturn. One day, he approached me at the Natural History Museum, discussing lost civilizations and the potential for New York to become a legendary, forgotten city. I was surprised by his knowledge of my thesis on cosmic rays and their potential as a source of power. Our acquaintance grew rapidly, with him visiting my laboratory and me visiting his modest lodgings. Despite our growing friendship, I remained ignorant about Elkin's past. He seemed older and intellectually more evolved, with an air of impossible seniority. I regarded him with awe, as if he were an elder with omniscient knowledge. His rooms were noncommittal, but his books revealed him to be a linguist. Our discussions were marked by his intellectual impersonality, vast range of information, and boundless reserves. He was skeptical of current medicine and surgery, and his views on electricity and astronomy were unconventional. Elkins showed interest in my research, but seemed to view it as elementary. Here is a summary of the text, shortened to 1,000 characters, while maintaining the storyline. Hugh is fascinated by Conrad Elkins, a mysterious man with an unusual ethnic distinction. Despite growing admiration, Hugh finds Elkins incomprehensible and alien. One day, Elkins reveals that he's from 15,000 AD and has come to the 20th century to discover the secret of sex determination, which was lost in the Dark Ages. Humanity in his era is threatened by an overpreponderance of male children. Elkins invites Hugh to accompany him back to his time, promising to explain the mysteries of his world. Hugh accepts, awed by the opportunity. Cronus Alkin, a man from 15,000 AD, visits Conrad Elkins in New York. Cronus brings ancient coins and a tunic from his time, which he wears to travel back in time. He plans to take Elkins with him on a world tour. They travel to the Catskills, where Cronus shows Elkins an anti-gravitational device that allows them to climb a cliff. They reach a time machine, a spindle-shaped vessel designed for air and ether travel. Cronus explains the machine's intricate machinery and introduces Elkins to his new identity, Huno Paskin. They dress in ancient attire and prepare for time travel. Cronus activates the machine, and they rise above the cliffs. He sets the controls for atmosphere and ether flight, and they travel to 15,000 AD. Elkins experiences a terrifying sensation as they enter the fourth dimension. When they arrive, Cronus awakens Elkins, and they exit the machine. They find themselves on Cronus, country estate near Jarma, the capital of Achameria, built on the ruins of New York City. The climate is subtropical, and weather conditions are controlled. Cronus shows Elkins his home, a shining edifice with aircraft, gardens, and fields of unknown vegetables. He introduces Elkins to his cousins, Altus and Oron, and the Martian overseer, Trog, who manages the Venusian slaves. Cronus took me to his estate, where I witnessed a terrifying scene. Two men, including Cronus' cousin Oron, and a Martian overseer named Trog, were fighting off a horde of bestial creatures from Venus. The creatures were armed with clubs and stones, and Cronus used his projector to defeat them. One of the men, Altus, was badly hurt, but Cronus used a device that emitted a green light to heal his wound. Cronus introduced me to Oron and Trog, and explained that the Venusians were a menace to humanity, breeding rapidly and outnumbering humans 5-1. He believed they needed only organization to become a major threat. We had a meal together, and Cronus spoke about his time voyage and his concerns about sharing the knowledge with others. He also told me about the world's motivations, which were focused on conquering remote knowledge, creating art, and enjoying intellectual and aesthetic sensations. Cronus explained that people lived for an average of 300-400 years, and that crime was rare. He also mentioned that half of their commerce was interplanetary, but they weren't a commercial people. Instead, they relied on slave labor on large plantations. Cronus showed me his laboratory, where he performed incredible feats of atomic transformation and microscopic analysis. Over the next few weeks, I learned the language and was given access to a vast library. Cronus and Oron instructed me in their ways, and I saw incredible marvels on the estate. In a futuristic era, I found myself transported to a world beyond my own time. Cronus, a kind host, showed me ancient relics from New York and other cities, which filled me with nostalgia for my own period. Altus, a wounded man, recovered fully, and I learned about the savage-looking Venusians who worked on the plantation with a sullen air. They were cannibalistic by nature and had been brought to Earth as slaves. The Martians, who came to Earth as traders, were philosophical and addicted to a powerful drug called ganultin. Cronus and his cousins used radio and television to stay in touch with the world, and I saw incredible scenes from Mars, Venus, and the Moon. News of daily outbreaks by Venusian slaves and mysterious sabotage spread, with some suspecting Martian involvement. A bizarre mineral plague, the black rot, emerged in Jarma, devouring buildings and spreading destruction. Cronus, a renowned chemist, was called to study the rot, and I accompanied him to Jarma. We attended a conclave of scientists where I suggested using radium to combat the plague. Cronus presented my idea, and it received great favor. The assembly approved the trial, and work began on preparing radium to arrest the black rot. With radium, the plague was soon under control, and the people of Jarma and Achameria were relieved. During our stay, Cronus and I were guests in a fine building set apart for visiting scientists. In the year 15,000 AD, I found myself in the midst of a futuristic city called Jarma, surrounded by incredible luxury and technology. I was amazed by the baths, beds, and aerial music that seemed to come from nowhere. The people of this era had mastered natural laws, and their quiet confidence was impressive. I was honored for my contribution to retarding the black rot, but I felt it was just a fortunate accident. Cronus, a kind and humble host, helped me avoid publicity and introduced me to the wonders of this new world. While he attended to business, I took long walks through the city, marveling at the unfamiliar sights and sounds. The city was peaceful, with strange vehicles and air vessels moving silently above. The people wore colorful costumes, and I noticed a scarcity of women who were valued and protected due to their rarity. Polyandry was common, and romantic love was unknown. As I explored, I encountered a Martian quarter with exotic architecture and strange odors. I felt a sense of unease, but also curiosity. One afternoon, I ventured out later than usual and heard rumors of fresh revolts. As twilight fell, I realized I had forgotten my electronic projector and felt a sense of menace. Suddenly, 7 or 8 Venusians attacked me, armed with clubs. I fought back, but they overpowered me, and I fell unconscious. When I came to, I was bound and surrounded by Venusians dancing around a fire. Another man, Joss Taller, was beside me, also bound. We conversed quietly, and I learned that he was the owner of the Venusian slaves who had revolted against him. He suspected a secret understanding between the Venusians and Martians, who might be smuggling deadly organisms to Earth. As we waited, helpless, the fire died down, revealing a bed of glowing coals, and we feared the worst. In a dark, eerie atmosphere, Joss Taller and I were surrounded by beast-like Venusians, their eyes gloating with hunger as they prepared to throw us onto a fire. But just as all hope seemed lost, a light appeared in the sky, an Achamerian air vessel, descending rapidly towards us. The vessel landed, and several men emerged, armed with heat ray generators that killed the Venusians. Our rescuers, led by Cronus Alkin, freed us from our bonds. As we flew back to Jarma, Cronus explained that a worldwide revolt of the slaves had begun, with Asia and Australia already in their hands. The Achamerians were fighting back with heat ray generators, but new perils had emerged, plagues loosed by the Venusians, assisted by the Martians. Insect swarms, gases, and vegetable molds were spreading rapidly, threatening to make the world uninhabitable for humans. Cronus told us that he had located us using a nocturnal televisor, which allowed him to see in the dark. He had chartered an air vessel and gathered companions to rescue us. As we returned to Jarma, we learned that Oron had been killed, Trog had disappeared, and Altus had fled in an air vessel. Cronus treated my wounds with a green ray, relieving my pain. We sat for hours, discussing the events of the day and receiving fresh reports. The situation was dire, with new plagues emerging daily. Cronus decided that we must retrieve his time machine from his estate, which was under attack by the Venusians. I protested, but Cronus insisted that I return to my own age, leaving the war to the Achaemerians. We flew to the estate, seeing devastation and blight along the way. The Venusians had fired the house and were approaching the aerodrome. Cronus steered the atomic monoplane towards the slaves, and we used heat ray projectors to defend ourselves. We managed to retrieve the time machine, but the world was on the brink of chaos. In the aftermath of the battle, Cronus, Hugh, and Altus returned to Jarma. The time vessel was safely stored, and the monoplane was left in Altus' care. As they flew over the plantation, they saw the destruction caused by the Venusians. Cronus remained calm, but Hugh could sense his sadness. The Martians had declared war, using their zero-ray to devastating effect. The people of Achaemeria were fighting back, but the situation was dire. A battle raged in the Martian quarter of Jarma, with the Martians holding their own. Despite the danger, the people of Achaemeria remained calm, thanks to their advanced mental evolution and philosophically detachment. They were prepared to face their fate with dignity. As the situation worsened, a new plague emerged, the Yellow Death, a microorganism that made the air unbreathable for humans. The only solution was for humanity to retreat to the Arctic Circle and eventually to the asteroids. Cronus, Hugh, and Altus prepared to leave Jarma, joining the mass exodus of humans fleeing the planet. Cronus predicted that the Martians would soon enslave the Venusians. As they flew north, Hugh admired the courage and organization of the people of Achaemeria. He had grown attached to Cronus and the people he had come to know. Eventually, they reached the polar regions, where humanity was establishing a temporary base. From there, they would travel to the asteroids, which would become their new home. Before departing, Cronus instructed Hugh on how to use the time machine to return to his own era. Hugh was filled with sorrow and excitement as he watched the last of humanity flee the planet. Cronus's face was unreadable, but he smiled at me with a hint of sadness. "It's time for me to leave, and for you too," he said. "Farewell, Hugh. We won't meet again. Remember me and the fate of humanity when you return to your time." He shook my hand, boarded the space liner with Altus, and they waved goodbye as the ship took off into space. I felt a pang of regret for not joining them, but I returned to my time vessel, started the engine, and began my journey through the ages. Conrad Elkins, a mysterious man, appeared on modern streets, seeming no stranger than anyone else. Yet, his strangeness was difficult to define. He had an aura of remote knowledge, wisdom, and aesthetic refinement. His features were Caucasian, but he didn't fit into any known ethnic stock. His age was indeterminable, and his garb was modish and well-tailored. He was a little under medium height, with delicate build and effeminate features, except for his great brow. His eyes were large, luminous, and purplish, and his hands were remarkable for their fineness, flexibility, and vigor. I, a chemistry student, encountered Elkins several times on the streets, in libraries, and museums. He was reading books on sex, biology, chemistry, and physics, and visiting museums to familiarize himself with modern science and archaeology. I was curious about him, but he was extremely taciturn, volunteering no information about himself. One day, I approached him at the Natural History Museum, where he was standing before a case of artifacts from the mounds of the Mississippi Valley. He forestalled me, asking if I had thought about civilizations being lost and buried by natural disasters and social upheavals. He spoke as if he had inside information on the subject. I was surprised that he knew my name and had read my thesis on cosmic rays. Our acquaintance grew rapidly, and he visited my laboratory many times. I was admitted to his modest lodgings, which were near mine. Despite our meetings, I remained ignorant about Elkin's past. He liked me, perhaps due to the universal human need of a friend. I felt a sense of impossible seniority on his part, as if he was older and intellectually more evolved than me. The furnishings of his rooms were noncommittal, but I saw that he was a linguist, with books in at least 4 modern languages. He was interested in various subjects, but spoke with intellectual impersonality, giving the impression of boundless reserves. He didn't think much of current medicine and surgery, and his pronouncements on electricity and astronomy were at variance with accepted ideas. Elkins showed interest in my chemical researches, but I felt that he looked upon them as elementary. Despite his enigmatic nature, I was drawn to him, and our quasi-friendship grew. I met Conrad Elkins, a mysterious man who seemed to possess knowledge from another era. Despite his enigmatic nature, I grew to admire and revere him. However, I couldn't help but sense that he was withholding information from me. One day, he revealed that he was not from our time, but from 15,000 AD. His real name was Cronus Alkin, and he had come to our era to uncover the secret of sex determination, which was lost in the Dark Ages. In his time, humanity was threatened by an overpreponderance of male children, and he believed that our era held the key to restoring balance. He invited me to accompany him back to his time, promising to explain everything and provide a safe return to my own era. I was stunned, but didn't doubt his veracity. I agreed to go with him, and he began to explain how he had traveled through time using a modified space travel vessel. He had studied our language, costumes, and history to blend in, and had even created his own clothes based on a 1940s design. He revealed that his departure was carefully planned, and he had made the time journey in a state of unconsciousness. He landed in the Catskill Mountains and made his way to New York, where he had been living and studying our civilization. In the story, a man named Elkins, who later calls himself Cronus Alkin, takes his friend on a journey through time to the year 15,000 AD. Before they leave, Cronus shows his friend some coins and clothes from his time period, including a tunic and sandals. They travel to a hidden location in the Catskill Mountains, where Cronus reveals a time machine. He explains how it works, and they both put on clothes from his time period. Cronus sets the machine to take them to the year 15,000 AD, and they experience a strange sensation as they travel through time. When they arrive, they find themselves on Cronus' country estate near Jarma, the capital of Achameria, which is built on the ruins of New York City. The climate is subtropical, and the weather is controlled by humans. Cronus shows his friend around the estate, which includes a large building with aircraft, gardens, and fields of unknown vegetables. They also see long, one-storied houses where Cronus' cousins and a Martian overseer live, as well as Venusian slaves who do the agricultural labor. Cronus carries an electronic projector that can paralyze people up to 50 yards away, which he uses to control the slaves. As they walk towards the house, they see fountains, palms, and unusual plants and flowers. Cronus told me that some of the strange beings on his estate were from Venus. As we walked through the hot, humid air, we came upon a terrifying scene. Two men, including Cronus' cousin Oron, and a massive, barrel-chested Martian named Trog, were fighting off a horde of bestial creatures. The creatures were armed with clubs and stones, and Cronus quickly used his projector to defeat them. As we approached, I saw one of the men, Altus, fall to the ground, badly hurt. Cronus and Oron tended to him, and I met Trog, who was intelligent and wise, but also strange and unbridgeable. We took Altus inside the beautiful house, where Cronus used a device to heal his wounds. Cronus explained that the Venusians were a major problem, as they were ferocious, bred quickly, and outnumbered humans. He also told me that he had shared the truth about his time travel with Oron, but wanted to keep it a secret from the rest of the world. As we ate dinner, Cronus spoke about the world of the future, where people lived for hundreds of years, and crime was rare. He said that people were motivated by desires for knowledge, art, and intellectual pursuits, rather than wealth and power. However, he worried that this life of ease might be making people weak. Cronus also told me about the interplanetary commerce and the use of slave labor on plantations. He said that they had the power to manufacture everything, but preferred natural food and materials. As I settled into life on the estate, I began to learn the language and was given access to a vast library and laboratory where Cronus performed incredible feats of science. In a world beyond my own, I found myself in the company of Cronus, a master of science. He showed me a cabinet filled with relics from ancient cities like New York, including porcelain plates, Masonic emblems, and spark plugs. The sight of these familiar, yet ancient objects filled me with a deep nostalgia for my own time. Altus, a wounded man, had recovered, and I heard no more of the insubordination from Cronus slaves. However, I couldn't shake off the memory of the savage-looking Venusians who worked on the plantation with a sullen air. They were cannibalistic by nature and had a history of selling their own tribe members to terrestrial traders. The Martians, on the other hand, were traders who had come to Earth, bringing with them their chemical and astronomical discoveries. They were a philosophical race, addicted to a powerful drug called ganultin, which gave them wild visions. Cronus and his cousins were in touch with the world through radio and television, receiving news from all over the planet, including Mars, Venus, and the Moon. I saw many incredible scenes on their televisors, including daily outbreaks of Venusian slaves and mysterious acts of sabotage. One day, news arrived of a bizarre mineral plague known as the Black Rot, which was devouring buildings in Jarma. The rot was a microorganism that had somehow been introduced from Venus, and it was capable of devouring half the elements known to chemistry. Cronus, a renowned chemist, was called upon to study the rot, and he took me with him to Jarma. In Jarma, I saw a city of supreme grace and beauty, with gardens and parks meandering through its extent. The architecture was open and aerial, and the streets were broad and spacious. I was struck by the sight of Martians and Venusians mingling with humans. At the conclave of savants, I met 200 men who had gathered to discuss the Black Rot. I was awed by their intellectuality and wisdom, but also noticed a world-old ennui and sterility on their faces. During the discussion, I suggested that radium might be used to combat the plague, and Cronus presented my idea to the assembly. The idea was met with great favor, and work began immediately to prepare radium on a large scale. In less than an hour, chemists were ready to visit the affected area with portable machines that used radium to arrest the black. In the year 15,000 AD, I found myself in the city of Jarma, surrounded by incredible luxury and technology. The people of this era had mastered natural laws, and their daily lives were filled with wonders like invisible music, intangible servants, and food appearing at a mere wish. I was honored as the originator of a means to stop the Black Rot, but I felt it was just a lucky accident. Cronus, my host, explained my aversion to publicity and helped me avoid numerous invitations. As Cronus attended to his business, I explored the city, marveling at the unfamiliar sights. I walked through streets filled with noiseless vehicles, air vessels, and ether ships. The people wore colorful costumes, and the atmosphere was tranquil and orderly. However, I noticed the scarcity of women, who seemed lifeless and mechanical. Cronus told me that the sex had reached its evolutionary limit and was now stagnant. I felt homesick as I wandered through the city, especially when I approached the Martian Quarter, where I saw strange architecture and exotic odors. One afternoon, I heard rumors of fresh revolts and decided to return to the city. As twilight fell, I found myself in a quiet, sylvan wilderness, but soon realized I was being stalked by Venusians. They attacked me, and I was knocked unconscious. When I came to, I was bound and surrounded by Venusians dancing around a fire. I saw another man, Joss Taller, bound beside me. We conversed quietly, and I learned that he was the owner of the Venusian slaves who had revolted against him. He suspected that the Martians were secretly supporting the Venusians and that they might unleash a deadly plague on humanity. As we lay there, we watched the Venusians prepare to broil us alive over the coals. Joss remained calm and philosophical, discussing the situation with me. We knew our fate seemed hopeless, but we continued to talk, waiting for the inevitable. In the darkening landscape, Joss Taller and I were surrounded by the grotesque Venusians, who were preparing to throw us onto a fiery gridiron. But just as all hope seemed lost, a bluish searchlight illuminated the scene, and an air vessel landed nearby. Cronus Alkin and his companions emerged, armed with heat ray generators, and chased away the Venusians. We were rescued just in time, as a worldwide revolt of the slave population had begun, with 2 continents already in their hands. The situation was dire, with new and baffling plagues spreading rapidly, including deadly Martian insects and gases harmful to humans. Cronus, Altus, and I returned to Jarma, where we learned of the devastating events unfolding across the world. With the Venusians and Martians working together, the human population was facing extinction. Cronus decided that I should return to my own time using the time machine, which we set out to retrieve from his estate. As we flew over the countryside, we saw the devastating effects of the war, with houses gutted by fire and fields blighted by the Venusian mold. We arrived at the estate just in time to stop the Venusians from destroying the aerodrome and the time machine. In a swift and deadly attack, we eliminated the slaves and secured the area. Cronus, Hugh, and Altus returned to Jarma in the time ship after defeating the Venusians. They found the city in chaos, with the Martians declaring open hostility and using a deadly zero ray to attack humans. The people of Achemeria remained calm despite the dire situation, and scientists worked to combat the new pests and develop weapons against the outsiders. As the situation worsened, a new plague, the Yellow Death, spread across the country, making the air unbreathable for humans. The only solution was for humanity to evacuate to the Arctic Circle, where the organism couldn't penetrate. Cronus predicted that the Martians would soon enslave the Venusians and rule them with an iron hand. As Jarma prepared to flee, Cronus, Altus, and Hugh were among the last to leave. They flew northward in the time vessel, watching as the saffron cloud of the plague covered the horizon. They eventually reached the polar regions, where humanity had entrenched itself, and saw cities being built amid the ice and snow. The plan was to flee to the larger asteroids, which had been colonized by humans. A great fleet of space vessels was assembled, and each day more ships arrived from mid-ether to assist in the universal exodus. Before departing, Cronus gave Hugh instructions on how to use the time machine to return to his own era. Hugh was to fly solo in a small ether vessel to Pallas, his supposedly natal asteroid. The day of departure arrived, and the vessels took off, carrying the remaining people of the world into outer space. Cronus and Hugh shared a solemn moment, watching as the ships disappeared into the distance. Hugh was filled with sorrow and excitement, knowing that humanity was abandoning its home and would become exiles among the worlds. Cronus's face was unreadable, but he finally smiled and said it was time for him and Hugh to part ways. "Remember me and the fate of humanity when you return to your own time," he said. Cronus and Altus waved goodbye as they boarded the spaceliner, leaving Hugh to return to his own time in the time vessel. Hugh felt a pang of regret for not joining them on their journey. Conrad Elkins, a mysterious man, appeared on modern streets, seemingly out of place. His unusual features, including his extreme pallor, fine hair, and delicate build, made it impossible to assign him to any known ethnic stock. His eyes were large and luminous, with an indescribable purplish color, and his hands were remarkable for their fineness, flexibility, and vigor. Elkin's habitual expression was enigmatic, and his motivations were unknown. He possessed an aura of remote, recondite knowledge, profound wisdom, and aesthetic refinement. Despite his taciturn nature, he was impeccably polite and seemed to desire to avoid making friends or acquaintances. The narrator, a chemistry student, became fascinated with Elkins and made inquiries about him. They eventually met at the Natural History Museum, where Elkins was studying artifacts from the mounds of the Mississippi Valley. Elkins spoke about the possibility of civilizations being lost, and how present-day New York might one day be as fragmentary and fabulous as Troy or Zimbabwe. Their acquaintance grew rapidly, and Elkins visited the narrator's laboratory, where they discussed topics such as cosmic rays and their potential as a source of power. Elkins showed a tactful interest in the narrator's research, but seemed to regard it as elementary. Despite their growing friendship, the narrator remained ignorant about Elkin's past and true nature. Elkin's rooms were modest and noncommittal, with books in multiple languages, indicating his linguistic abilities. He seemed to possess boundless reserves of knowledge, but maintained an air of intellectual impersonality in their discussions. Here's the summary. I met Conrad Elkins, a mysterious man who spoke about transmuting metals as if it were possible. I was drawn to him, but he remained an enigma. One day, he revealed that he was from 15,000 AD and had traveled back in time to the 20th century. His real name was Cronus Alkin, and he had come to learn about sex control, which was crucial to his time period as they faced extinction due to an overpreponderance of male children. He had been living in New York for a year, studying our civilization, and now invited me to accompany him back to his time. I was stunned, but accepted his offer. In the story, the narrator meets a man named Conrad Elkins, who claims to be from the year 15,000 AD. Elkins shows the narrator a coin and a garment from his time period, and explains that he has a time machine hidden in the Catskill Mountains. The narrator agrees to accompany Elkins on a journey through time, and they set off towards the mountains. Elkins uses an anti-gravitational device to reach the top of a cliff, and then helps the narrator to do the same. They enter the time machine, a spindle-shaped vessel, and Elkins explains the machinery and controls. He changes into his own clothes, a tunic and sandals, and gives the narrator similar garments to wear. Elkins introduces himself as Cronus Alkin and the narrator as Huno Paskin, a young colonial from Pallas. They strap themselves into slings, and Cronus Alkin sets the controls for their journey through time. They rise above the cliffs, fly south, and then Cronus Alkin activates the time power, which transports them into the fourth dimension. The narrator experiences a terrifying sensation as they travel through time. When they arrive in 15,000 AD, they find themselves on Cronus Alkin's country, a state near Jarma, the capital of Achameria. The narrator is amazed by the unfamiliar surroundings, including aircraft, gardens, and buildings with strange architecture. Cronus Alkin explains that the climate is subtropical and that humans have control over the weather. He also mentions that they have imported slaves from Mars and Venus to perform menial tasks. Cronus told me that some Venusians were brought to Earth. We walked through a humid air filled with odors, which Cronus enjoyed inhaling. We came to an open lawn where a terrifying scene unfolded. Two men, like Cronus, and a huge, barrel-chested Martian overseer named Trog, were fighting against a horde of bestial creatures. The creatures were hurling clubs and stones, and Cronus used his projector to defeat them. The slaves dispersed, and we joined the group on the lawn. One of the men, Altus, was badly hurt, and Cronus introduced me to his cousin Oron. They spoke in a language I couldn't understand, but Cronus explained that Trog was intelligent and reserved. We took Altus into the house, which was made of a synthetic substance prepared by atomic transmutation. The furniture was beautiful, with light, curving lines, and there were scores of paintings and statues. Cronus used a bulb-shaped mechanism to heal Altus' wound with a green light. Cronus explained that the Venusians were a menace, breeding rapidly and outnumbering humans. He said it was a mistake to bring them to Earth. After dinner, Cronus spoke about his time voyage and the mechanical principle involved, which he wanted to keep secret. He told me about the world's motivations, aspirations, and mode of life, including interplanetary commerce and the use of slave labor. I spent several quiet weeks on Cronus estate, learning the language, accessing a fine library, and witnessing incredible marvels of atomic transformation in Cronus laboratory. In a world beyond my own, I found myself in the era of Cronus, where advanced science and technology reigned. Cronus showed me ancient relics from New York and other cities, which sparked a deep nostalgia within me. Meanwhile, Altus recovered from his wound, and the slaves of Cronus seemed obedient once again. However, I couldn't shake off the memory of the savage-looking Venusians who worked on the plantation with a sullen air. Their ancestors were cannibalistic and violent, and their habits were hard to curb. The Martians, who came to Earth as traders, were taciturn and aloof. They had permitted humans to use their chemical and astronomical discoveries, but their services were sometimes procurable for positions like trogs. The Venusians were willing to sell even their own tribe members, and their instincts were those of wolves and tigers. Cronus and his cousins were in touch with the world through radio and television, receiving news from Earth stations on Mars, Venus, the Moon, and asteroids. I saw many incredible scenes on their televisors, including daily outbreaks of Venusian slaves and mysterious acts of sabotage. The news was not reassuring, confirming Cronus' prophetic fears. One day, we received news of the black rot, a bizarre minerals plague that was devouring buildings in Jarma. The rot was caused by a microorganism from Venus, and its appearance on Earth seemed like an act of sabotage. Cronus, a renowned chemist, was summoned to study the rot, and he took me with him to Jarma. We traveled in a light air vessel to the city, which was a source of fascination for me. The architecture was open and aerial, with many gardens and parks. The streets were broad and spacious, with few large buildings. I was struck by the mixture of humans, Martians, and Venusians living together. At the conclave of savants, I met many wise and venerable men who were discussing the black rot. I suggested using radium to combat the plague, and Cronus presented the idea to the assembly. The proposal met with great favor, and work began immediately to prepare radium on a large scale. In less than an hour, chemists were ready to visit the affected area with portable machines that used radium to arrest the black rot. In the year 15,000 AD, I was amazed by the luxurious lifestyle of the people, who had mastered natural laws with quiet confidence. I was honored as the originator of a means to retard the black rot, but I felt it was just a fortunate accident. Cronus, my host, explained my aversion to publicity, and I avoided numerous invitations. Cronus had business to attend to, so I went for long walks in Jarma, exploring the unfamiliar city of the future. I saw vehicles without visible means of propulsion, air vessels flying overhead, and ether ships landing and departing hourly. The city was orderly and tranquil, with people of both sexes and all ages wearing gaily colored costumes. However, I noticed the scarcity of women who were often lifeless and mechanical looking. Cronus told me that the sex had reached its evolutionary limit and was now stagnant. Polyandry was prevalent, and romantic love was unknown. As I wandered, I felt homesick, especially when I approached the Martian quarter, where a colony of mysterious outsiders lived. Their architecture defied geometry, and the streets were filled with exotic odors, including the drug Ganulton. One afternoon, I ventured out later than usual and noticed fewer Venusians in the throng. I overheard rumors of fresh revolts, but paid little attention. As twilight fell, I turned back from the open country toward the Martian quarter, feeling a vague apprehensiveness. Suddenly, 7 or 8 Venusians, armed with clubs, attacked me. I fought back, but they overwhelmed me, and I lost consciousness. When I came to, I was bound and lying near a great fire, surrounded by dancing Venusians. Another man, Joss Taller, was bound beside me. Joss told me that the Venusians were waiting for the fire to die down to broil us alive on a metal grating. He believed there had been a concerted revolt, and the slaves were not as unintelligent as people thought. They had secret means of communication and might have a tacit understanding with the Martians. As we conversed, I learned that Joss was the owner of the slaves and suspected that they had been abetting the Martians. He feared that the end of human supremacy was near. In the darkening landscape, Joss Taller and I were surrounded by the grotesque Venusians, who dragged us towards the fire with their filthy talons. Their eyes gleamed with an unholy hunger, and their mouths slavered with anticipation. Just as all hope seemed lost, a bluish searchlight illuminated the scene, and an Acamerian air vessel landed nearby. Cronus Alkin and his companions emerged, armed with heat ray generators, and chased the Venusians away. Cronus freed us from our bonds and explained that he had tracked us down using a nocturnal televisor. A global slave revolt had broken out, and the situation was dire. We returned to Jarma, where we learned that Oron had been killed, Trog had vanished, and Altus had escaped with his life. Cronus tended to my wounds with the green ray, and we spent the night discussing the unfolding catastrophe. The next morning, we received devastating news. Europe was now under the control of the interplanetary slaves, and deadly diseases from Mars and Venus were spreading rapidly. Cronus decided that we must retrieve the time machine from his estate, which was under attack by the Venusians. We flew to the estate, fighting off the slaves and arriving just in time to save the time machine. Here is a summary of the text in 1,000 characters. Cronus, Hugh, and Altus escaped from Venusians and returned to Jarma. The Martians had declared open hostility, using a zero ray that could penetrate animal tissue. The people of Acameria remained calm, trying to combat the new pests and devise weapons against the outsiders. A new plague, the Yellow Death, spread rapidly, making the air unbreathable for humans. The only solution was to evacuate to the Arctic Circle. Cronus predicted that the Martians would enslave the Venusians. Hugh admired the stoical courage of the people in the face of disaster. As Jarma prepared to flee, Cronus, Altus, and Hugh were among the last to leave. They flew north in the time vessel, seeing the saffron cloud of the plague below. Humanity had entrenched itself in the polar regions, but the climate was too harsh, so they decided to flee to the larger asteroids. Before departing, Cronus instructed Hugh on how to use the time machine to return to 1930. Cronus's face was unreadable, but he finally smiled with a hint of sadness. "It's time for me to leave, and for you too," he said. "Goodbye, Hugh. We won't meet again. Remember me and the fate of humanity when you're back in your own time." He shook my hand, boarded the space liner with Altus, and they waved goodbye as the ship took off into space. I felt a pang of regret for not joining them, but I locked myself in the time vessel and started my own journey through time.